Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is Erin Naler. I met her at a conference a month or so ago on art, and we had some really good interaction there, and I invited her on the podcast. So, welcome, Erin. Glad you're here, and tell us a little bit about who you are and what. How do you spend your days?
Well, how I spend my days. Well, I used to spend my days a lot busier than I do now, or on something different. For the last 24 years, I've theater at a Christian liberal arts institution. I was the head of the theater department for about the last 4 years. And so most of what I did was teach college students theater history and philosophy, and directing, and I directed plays and I was in plays. And then last year, because of a series of, um, I would deem a series of unfortunate events, and also fortuitous events that were really directed by God, I quit my job and for some very interesting reasons that maybe we'll talk about, but I felt like the Lord was making that really clear to me that it was time for me to quit and do something different. And so I took up some adjunct teaching, which I'm doing right now. I'm teaching theater adjunct at a community college. And then that pays the bills. And then everything else I'm doing is a lot of stuff that I've wanted to do for several years that I haven't really had time to do. Um, and I'm enjoying taking opportunities as they present themselves and saying yes to things. I have a PhD in aesthetics from the University of Texas in Dallas, which I thoroughly enjoyed doing and would do all over again if I could. I
Oh,
love school.
I'm impressed.
School is really fun. I like school. Um, and so, yeah, so I have that degree in aesthetics, which the way that I approached it, what was really cool about the program is you could kind of approach it however you wanted to, like a lot of PhD programs. But this one in particular was pretty interdisciplinary. So I studied American theater, and then I also studied social documentary photography from the first half of the 20th century. So you're probably familiar with, Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother, that
Right.
photograph.
Yeah.
I studied that body of work. It's called The File, and it's the largest collection of art that is owned by the American people. So it's actually a pretty cool, deep well of aesthetics and information and history and art and stories. It's just so good. So that's kind of a niche interest that I have. Again, when I tell people, I say, well, I pretty much just studied 1930s social documentary photography, which I really love. Um, so that was my study. And so then kind of right now, what I'm doing is seeing what the Lord has for me next. It probably will have something to do with theater. I've got a few projects going on that I'm interested in. Just finished a show actually that I was in for the last month, which was really fun. And I'm just gonna kind of see what's next for my life. So I went from having a really structured, very stable employment, a really stable kind of a life, to a lot more risky, which was something that I wanted. I felt like I had chosen things that God had for me for sure, but I felt like I was avoiding risk taking for a lot of years. And other people may see my life differently, but I knew that I was really trying to stay as safe as possible in my life because I was pretty fearful. Um, and so the Lord made it really clear to me that that's not really what he had for me. He wasn't interested in my safety. He was really more interested in something else in my life. So, yeah, that's what I do. It's kind of what I'm doing with my life these days.
Wow. Wow. I didn't expect that. Um, I'm in the midst of writing a piece for Substack on my Substack about risk and change and
Okay.
and the fulfillment of potential and and I'm very oriented around change and accepting risk. And so I'd like us to maybe go down that rabbit hole for a while because I think people are going to be interested in your perspective and my perspective because it's increasingly apparent that the stability of the world that we live in is failing.
Yeah.
And so to me, risk is equated with opportunity or um, newness or discovery or and when people say something to me a lot like that, they say, "What should I do?" I say, "Just watch your money. If you can manage going through lots of change and
Hmm.
preserve your financial stake in your life, then you're going to be able to expand what you do and go in places that you never would. You're going to be liberated to really fulfill the potential that you have."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I, I am not married and I don't have children. And so I would say that throughout my life, I've been fairly, I mean, I'll just be really vulnerable. I've been fairly fearful about money. I would say that money has always been a point of tension for me, a point of fear. Um, Not because I was made to be afraid of money. I was not taught to be afraid of money. I was just born to be afraid of money, I think. I have a little bit of a, if I didn't have, as a child, I can remember as a child, if I didn't have $1,000 to my name, whether that was in my top drawer of my dresser, cash stashed in my top drawer, as a kid, I felt like I was gonna not be okay. And I've carried that forward into my life in a way that I think was really unhealthy, but I also think was really without a lot of faith. That sounds maybe like a weird way to say it, but I think I thought I had to I've always thought I had to take care of myself. That that when it came down to it, God was not going to provide for me. And I think I know, because the last 6 months have been a real test of that. Um, I know that a lot of that has to do with the idea that I don't think I believed that God was generous. And I think you dig even deeper into that, and I think I had believed the lie of modernity, speaking of modernity, that the universe is stingy and that we serve a God who is withholding. And I think there's a lot of Christianity that even teaches us that, right? Like there's a lot of practices in our faith, or maybe the lack of practice in our faith, that causes us to believe that somehow God is withholding himself from us. And I think that idea has dug itself so deeply into my brain and into my heart. And then you combine that with my temperament and all that kind of wound up together. I think I have for a lot of years believed that God could not possibly be generous to me because I don't think I believed that the universe was bursting with God's generosity. And the last few years, the Lord has just brought some things into my life, things that I've read and people that I've encountered that have been an enormous encouragement to me, that have really opened my eyes, I think, to my default state. And that default state has been that if I take a risk, I will fail, right? And that failure is somehow a demonstration of God's stinginess. And the last few years, I've been frustrated with my creative work and frustrated with my sort of way of approaching the world, um, because I realized I was believing that God was really withholding. And then to see God put me in a position at my place of employment where I didn't really have a lot of options, but to walk away. Um, I mean, I had an option, but I had asked God to reveal himself in some really direct ways, kind of as a Hail Mary one day. Did not think God was actually going to follow through, and he did. And that there's really silly things I was praying for in the scope of things. And when they all sort of converged, it was like the Lord said, "No, do you think I'm generous enough or not? Do you believe that you can take this risk and it will be okay?" And I did. I believed that I could take the risk and it would be okay. And my hope has been that taking a real personal risk at at with my employment, financially, that I would learn how to take more creative risks, if that makes sense, that I would take more vocational risks because I had remained very safe for a really long time. And who doesn't love stability? I mean, lots of people love stability. I happen to be a person that loves just stability. Not everybody does, but I really love it. And I am learning that stability and safety doesn't always look like what I thought it looked like.
It's okay to like stability. It is. I mean, I, I think part of the trap, and I think this is particularly true with people who are sincere in their faith and sincere in wanting to do what God asks of them, is that they get twisted up in all their motives and all their and they don't know really what to do, and they want to trust God, but that all that it gets really complicated. It's overly complicated because on the one hand, I've got to make my decisions. I have to act on those decisions. I have to deal with my decisions. I have to deal with the outcome of those decisions. And yet I'm also trusting that God is going to be there for me. And I think the hard thing to do is to say, I'm going to trust without seeing an immediate return on that trust.
Right. And I think I'm at that place. I'll say, so last week I finished up a show, as I mentioned. And if you, as we know, artists, as all artists know and those associated with them, when you finish a project, when you finish a really big project that has required a lot of your time and is a little exhausting, you get to the end of it and you have this, you sort of fall off the edge of the earth for a few days. And that's very normal in theater. You do a show, it's very intense for weeks on end. You do these big performances, you get home, you're exhausted, you wake up the next day and you're like, who am I? What have I done with my life? Why am I here? And last Sunday morning, I was sitting in church, and before the service started, this thought just and it just things just entered my mind, and I wrote them down really fast. And it said, I said something like, I feel like I've wasted the last 10 years of my life. And the last 10 years have been just wasted being fearful and being afraid to take a risk. What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to move forward? Because I feel like I'm stuck. I feel a little stuck, but I felt stuck for several years. And so I actually got unstuck. When my brain is rested, I know I'm unstuck. Anyway, so I wrote all this down. I just wrote it down really quickly on my phone, and then the sermon started, and my pastor was speaking on waiting and active waiting and how God is with us when we're waiting. And it was really an encouragement because I was feeling like, I feel like I've been waiting for God to do something, and maybe what God is doing is he's already doing the things, right? Like in his generosity and care, which I believe that God's universe is, I believe reality is bursting with generosity, right? Like I believe that by faith. And I think God wants me to believe that by experience as well. And that doesn't mean millions of dollars, but I think what that means is care, that I see that God is caring for me in ways that I could not have anticipated, both personally and creatively. My hope is that after years of feeling really stifled, that the Lord will give generosity and grace in those areas as well, because I feel like I have been burning the candle at both ends, running a marathon, whatever metaphor you want to use. I feel like I've just been stretched thin. And I don't know. There's a quiet faith in me that this risk is actually the risk that it's not going to solve anything, but what it's going to do is help me move towards my vocation in a better way and in a healthier way and in a fuller way and in a more generous way, if that makes sense. Like that I will move into it more generously with others as well.
It makes perfect sense. And the little voice that's hanging over our shoulder throughout all that is, you should have already known this. You should already
Yes.
be doing that. And so we're not really allowed to learn anything, and we're not allowed to fail, and we're not allowed to change because somehow we have this expectation of perfection. Oh, we come to faith and we believe in God, and all of a sudden everything's supposed to be set and stable and normal when it may be the most disruptive thing that anyone could ever choose to do, because maybe no one in their life has ever expressed faith. No one ever, maybe the whole family is atheist. Maybe they're shoving aside everything that they've known throughout their entire life to venture into something which seems so alien, and yet something down deep inside of them says this is real, and this is something I have to pursue. I have to go see if this is something that's for me. And does that answer get answered in 2 or 3 days? Or does it take 2 or 3 years? Or maybe it takes the rest of your life to find that out. See, I think this is the dynamism of the spiritual life, or the dynamism of consciousness, or the dynamism of reality, is that it is not fixed in some stable way that we can therefore control. And so if it's not fixed like that, then what happens if we decide we're just going to cast our cares to the wind, and we're going to respond to what is put before us every day, and we decide, oh, I'm going to do this. Like, I have a friend that needs some money, and he needs some money because he's wants to pursue a doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have enough money for the doctorate,
Mm-hmm.
but he needs some help. Now, I'm thinking, do I risk giving him the money and therefore him not finishing the program, and therefore I have wasted my money on him? Or do I give him the money with the expectation that once I give it, it's not mine anymore, it's his? And um, and there are there are plenty of people, there are a lot of people that ask me for money, not because I'm wealthy, but just because I'm in relationship with them. And almost all of them I say no to, because at the same time there's a trust issue. Do I trust that they're going to use this money um, appropriately or well? And and why am I bailing them out? Because obviously I know them well enough to see that they have put themselves in jeopardy, and therefore they need money. Am I going to give them money to help them out? Well, I might, but 9 times out of 10, I'm not. And I think the money issue is really, and the only way I know how to do that is because I've had to deal with it myself. So when I finished college, I I went into a typical ministry college, I mean a high school ministry, and I had to raise my support.
Okay.
And I didn't raise enough money. And
Mm.
my thought was, it doesn't matter. I will live on what I'm given. And
Right.
I am not in the mode of accumulating wealth.
Right.
I'm not interested in accumulating wealth. I'm
Right.
interested in other things.
Yes.
And so it's, and that carried on through, and that, it's not, I've never been penniless or,
Right.
impoverished, but that idea of putting money as a kind of a secondary principle rather than a primary principle um, uh, was really liberating.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's been in my mind recently, the last few months, the thing that the Lord keeps bringing to mind is there are more important things than money. I mean, I know that's what you're saying, and it's so simple to say that. And we live in a world that is all based upon this capitalist economy, and I'm not here to entirely bash capitalism, although there's plenty to bash about capitalism. That's a fruitless endeavor. But I feel like I I think the best way I can put it is I had come to value my life based upon other people's valuation of it,
Uh-huh.
the amount of money I was making. And the thing that has been so predominant in my thinking of late is why were you letting, first of all, other people value your life and let that affect you? A, and B, why were you valuing your life by the amount of money you were making? Not that I was making that much money, but I was making plenty of money to live the way I needed to live, right? And that's been through my mind a lot because while I was doing all of that, there was a lot of good work to do, work that I loved to do, work that I was happy to do. But there was also a lot of burnout, and there was also a lot of discouragement, and there was also some pretty serious, I would argue, some toxicity in my work environment. That is just the nature of work environments, certain kinds of work environments. And quitting helped me rest. And I mean, I feel like I woke up a few months ago one morning and I was laying in bed and I thought, for the first time in about 5 years, I'm not angry, anxious, or cynical. And I have been angry, anxious, and cynical for about 5 or 6 years. And I am none of those things today. I am just waiting to see what God puts in my path this week. I feel like that sounds super privileged. I feel like that sounds really, I'm not independently wealthy and neither is my family. So I've got to still pay all my bills and work to do all of that. But I realized there are more important things than being burned out in order to make a certain salary that would afford me things that I wanted to do all the time, right? Um, and in some ways, what it's done is it's deepening my contentment with what God is doing. I know I mentioned to you about contemplative practices, and I think this is kind of where that works into all of this. I grew up Protestant, very Protestant, grew up at a Bible church. I'm currently at a Presbyterian church, but I would say that for most of my life, I wasn't really acquainted with contemplative practices because the churches that I went to as a child, the church that I went to as a child didn't really focus on all of that, like a lot of evangelicalism and Protestantism doesn't, as an attempt to overcome Catholicism. And so the last few months, I have sort of encountered some more contemplative practices and thinking through, I've been working through the Ignatian 40 weeks of prayer.
Hmm.
And that has just been so profoundly difficult and so profoundly healing.
Wow.
Um, and it has generously afforded me the opportunity to listen instead of speak. I think so much of Protestant prayer and so much prayer in America, probably and in the world, is about talking. And it's great. Talk to God. Like we don't do that. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but I'm saying so much of what we do is about talking and not listening. And a few months ago, my church paid for me to go to a silent retreat or a monastery for a week. 5 days. It was 5 days. And during that time, when I arrived, the first thing, I got my stuff unpacked and sitting on the bed in the silent room. Beautiful. It's in Charleston. And or near, it's not in Charleston, it's a little ways from Charleston. And
I think I know where it is.
you know where it is? I said out loud to the Lord, all right, Lord, I'm here. What do you want? Like, what are we gonna do? Because I got this whole week ahead of me. And I get to eat in silence, which the first time you do that is a little troubling because you're surrounded by people. The second time you're like, oh Lord, thank you. I don't have to make small talk with strangers. This is great. Um, and then I can go to prayers, and then I got to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my time. And so I just asked the Lord, what do you want? What is this about? What do you want? And it was like the Lord reminded me, um, Erin, you've spent a lot of your life talking, and you've spent a lot of your life listening to other people. And maybe it's time for you to listen. Maybe it's time for you to stop listening to other people and start listening to me and start listening to you. What if you listen to you and me instead of everyone else and you didn't feel the need to talk about it? And, because I'm an actor and a director and a teacher and a professor. And so all I do is talk. And so I was like, all right, that seems pretty clear. And so that was just such a great few days to listen to the Lord. And so coming out of that week, I started doing that Ignatian 40 weeks of prayer. And it's so much about listening to the Holy Spirit, and you invite the Holy Spirit into your time and you sit quietly and you remain present. And I can't say that in my almost 50 years of life that I have ever just sat quietly and asked the Holy Spirit to speak into my life. Now, lots of people do that. I don't know that I had done that. I don't know that I had really thought through what that meant or had that kind of a discipline. And I would say that doing that, it's not perfection. It hasn't, I have not achieved any sort of perfection in my life. But what it has done is it has helped me think about what is the story that God is telling in my life. And how do I need to shut my mouth and let God speak and give him time to speak into my life while I'm waiting for him to do that? Because he will. He promises that he will. And like you said, he's not going to do it overnight. He may do it overnight. I don't know. I mean, I will say last January, I prayed 4 very specific prayers, too silly, too serious. Within 2 months, he had answered all of those prayers and I quit my job. So, and it all happened about overnight. It happened in about 24 hours. And I think he can do things very quickly, but he can also do things very slowly. And I just haven't shown up for it, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think I've shown up for it. And I think that's something that the Lord is teaching me, is to show up and shut my mouth and to listen to what he's saying, but also listen to what my heart is saying, if that makes sense. Because I think that's something that I haven't done, is really reflected on what do I want. So yeah, I kind of wove that in there, but I think that's been a big part of what's been going on in my life in the last few months as well.
That's what you've described is a perfect picture of change that we can all experience if we choose to let go and allow ourselves to experience it.
Yeah. And so much of what has been going on is the Lord saying, let it go, let that go, let that go, let that, let your control go. Stop controlling that. Let your plan go.
So, have you sort of cast out fear from your life?
Oh gosh, wouldn't that be great? Let's see if we can order that up. I'd love to get rid of fear. I would say that that's a daily practice. Um, I don't know, I can't speak to other people, but I think I'm a fairly fearful person. But I had somebody recently who knows me pretty well say, I actually don't think you're fearful at all. I think what you do is you're honest about what you're afraid of and you face it. Okay, so this last week, so I drive in the mornings, my commute to where I teach is a little long. And so I've been listening to the Chronicles of Narnia, where they're read aloud. I've been listening to those in the last couple of weeks. And I chose for this week to listen to The Horse and His Boy, which I really love, but I'd sort of forgotten all of the parts of it. And there's that moment when the boy, whose name has left me since I have to remember it, he is riding across the desert and there are tombs. He's leaving Tashban and he's riding across the desert because he's got there's a whole situation going on. Anyway, and it's nighttime and there are these tombs in the desert and he's terrified of the tombs, but he'd rather face them than not face them. He's afraid to put his back to them. And so he lays down facing the tombs. And of course, this cat is there, right? It's Aslan. And this cat is there and the cat lays at his back. And he describes it as he's facing the tombs with this warm cat sleeping at his back. And he doesn't know that it's Aslan. And later Aslan appears to him and says, I was the cat that was with you and you faced the tombs and I laid at your back, right? It's so beautiful. I love that. I had forgotten how much I love that. I would say that is a really great picture of probably how I face my fear, is I tend to face it. I tend to lay down and look at it. So whether that means I've abandoned my fear or cast it out of my life, I don't know. I think I tend to look at it and hold it and try to look at it and then say, okay, here are the things that could happen. If those happen, I will survive that. I can remember when I went to grad school, I moved to Dallas all by myself, just moved there, had an apartment. I was like, all right, here we go. I'm going to go to school. And I remember on the first day of class thinking, well, a few things could happen. I could fail. That's an option. I could quit. That's always an option. I could succeed at this. I might even actually be pretty good at it. Or I could die. I had to choose the die option as part of all the options. I could die. And if any of those things happen, it would be okay. And then once I looked at it, it was like facing the tombs. I could say, well, one option is that I could die. I could die of school or I could die of failure, but it will be okay.
So you've sort of learned to accept whatever is presented to you.
I think so. I think that's probably what my life will be. Like, I wish I could say someday I will have no fear. I'll be fearless. I love people who are fearless. I'm not one of them. But I think I've learned to acknowledge that I'm fearful and say it out loud.
Well, you know that. Maybe you know this. 30 years ago, there was a book published by a fellow named Gavin De Becker called The Gift of Fear.
Okay. I don't know it.
Yeah, and The Gift of Fear is it's a great book because what he explores there is that fear is a form of awareness of the circumstances that we're in. If we're not afraid, if we don't, I mean, if we're walking down the street and we're coming on there's an alley, a dark alley there, we're going to feel some fear because we don't know what's there. And so we may cross the street to avoid that alley, which would be a logical,
Yeah.
very constructive approach to a dark alley, which is I'm
Right.
going to avoid it. So this is what he describes, and he's a security guy now. I mean, he does security, private security for people, prominent people, stuff like that. But when I read that probably 25 years ago, I thought this is really I like someone who can take something so negative as fear and create a positive version of it,
Mm.
and which is what he was doing. And so um, what I've done is I've kind of accepted, okay, there are things I'm going to be fearful about, but I'm not going to allow them to debilitate me. So let me give you an example. I moved back to my hometown here in Winston-Salem last February, and I've been gone for 53 years. So I finished high school and never came back for a host of reasons. I wanted to wander the world, and that's exactly what I've done. I've traveled everywhere, and and clearly there is a side to this story where God isn't present in my life, and I don't, broadcast that all the time, but there is that. And I've been very conscious that the things that I've been led into were divinely placed before me. And I had, as a 17-year-old, basically come to realize, oh, God was real, and therefore whatever God wants of me, I'm going to go do. You just have to show it to me.
Yeah.
And that's a very simplistic approach to faith, but I took it not as a simplistic approach to faith, but actually a mandate to go discover and test things and test to see whether that sense of God's presence was real or is just some kind of psychological manifestation of something that I was longing for, because that's, for some people it might well be. So in a sense I got rid of fear, and I replaced it with a sense of trust, but the trust was never absolute. It was always, okay, what am I trusting here? What is and what it meant was I'm entering into something which I don't know what the outcome will be, and I'm going to have to not sit there and decide, is this a good decision or a bad decision? No, I'm going to sit there and say, this is the decision I made. How am I going to live through this decision?
Right. Yeah. You know, it's funny. When I quit my job last year, several people said to me, "Do you think you made the right decision?" That's a question people ask you, right? Like you
Of
probably know.
course. Yeah.
Do you think you made the right decision? And my reply very quickly, right away after I made that decision, and still my reply is always, it wasn't the right decision, it was a good decision. That's
Oh, yeah.
different. If I had stayed, it would have been the right decision. And it was a decision that was made in hope. I think even more so, it was a hopeful
Yeah.
decision because it said, I don't have to be afraid of what's next. I can make this decision and it's good because the person with whom I made this decision is a good and generous God. And that is enough. And I am sure throughout my life, people said that to me. I was taught that. I have dear enough parents that I'm sure I was taught that, but it did not sink into my head until I made a really big decision that for which I had to be very responsible. And I, like you were saying, it's probably what it's done is it's strengthened my courage, right? Because now I say, I don't know, it's not about it being the right thing to do. It's just about being the thing that's next to do. And I'm working right now on a project with some people. And one of the things that the Lord brought to mind when we started this is I said, what if we just go week by week? And we meet on Fridays. And what if on Friday we look at one another and we say, do we want to keep doing this for another week? And if we all want to keep doing it for another week, we keep doing it for another week. And if at any point we want to stop doing it, we stop doing it and we do something different. And instead of asking myself the question, what projects do I want to do? What if I ask myself the question, who do I want to collaborate with? What if I started there? What if I started with my relationships and I said, who do I want to work with? What if I went to them and I said, I like you. I want to work with you. I think we could probably come up with a really good idea. Instead of saying, where are the people who need me? Or who's going to approach me about a project? What if I just said, I don't know, who do I know that I really want to work with? And what if I just ask them to work with me and see what God does with all of that and then just go week by week and see what he does with that, which is kind of what this other project is that we're working on. And so we check in on Fridays and say, hey, we want to keep doing this. This
I
is
like,
really
I
fun.
like, I like that a lot. And, so here's another facet of all of this.
Okay.
You, like me, you reached a point and you made a decision and you ended something and you moved into something new. How much of what you had before are you carrying with you into this new situation? Or are you the metaphor I use is you are living in a room, a door opens, you look through the door and you say, that's where I'm supposed to go. You walk through that door and you pull the door closed. And so what you had before is now in the past, and it's not joining you in this new venture or this new life that you're creating for yourself. So how much of that how do you see yourself in the midst of that scenario?
Okay, let me extend your metaphor. Because I think what I'm doing is walking through the door and grabbing everything that was in the room with me and pulling it through the door with me. But it's all going to change.
Okay.
So I think what God is doing, and I'm saying this with hope, because I think that I said this recently to a friend, you know, I think we think that when we make these kinds of decisions, that God wants something totally different for us. But the thing that he has for us is the thing that he has for us. And if I lose it because I leave a job, I will gain it in a new way. And so the way I look at it is I've I'm walking through that door and everything behind me is like crashing down with me through that door. And it's all going to get funneled through that door and it's going to get changed. And it's going to get narrower and it's going to get more refined and it's going to be like the reality behind me is turning inside out behind me. I don't know how else to say it. In my head, I have this vision of like going through that door and everything behind me is stuck to me. And as I go through the door, it's all kind of turning inside out as I move through the door. You know, when you pull a sock inside out, kind of that idea. And then as it goes through, that the things that are there that are mine will still be mine. And the things that are there that are no longer mine will be left behind. And I don't know what that looks like, but but the thing that has been made really clear to me, even in the last couple of months, is there are things I am very good at. And I didn't even realize it until I walked through that door. And then I was like, oh, wow, I'm actually pretty good at that. And on the other side of the door, I go, I had really devalued those things in my life because other people didn't see them, but they're really valuable things. And I need to bring those through the door with me. So what that looks like on the other side of the door, I think for me is still unknown. I mean, sure, I'm still in a classroom. I feel like in one way or another, I will always be in a classroom. That is the thing that I just feel like God has given me to do. Whether that looks like formal education or informal education, getting up in front of a group of people and dealing with very difficult ideas in a really simple way that makes people want to go out and do them is something I'm very good at. I'm also really good at entertaining people, and I can perform. It's not hard. Those are easy things for me to do. I enjoy them. That is where I'm fearless. You put me on stage with a script and I'm totally fearless. That doesn't scare me at all, ironically. The thing everybody else is afraid of, public speaking, is the one thing I'm not afraid of. So I feel like those are the things that are coming with me, but what those will look like on the other side, only the Lord knows right now. But I feel like right now my job is to say yes to things and to throw as many things at the wall as I have the energy to throw and that I have the money to manage, and see what God does with those. Because I think when it all comes down to it, God has not changed his mind about who I am, right? He doesn't change his mind about who we are when we give up something. We're still that person that he made. And I believe that that we are living into that reality of who he has made us to be. And that just probably gets better the older we get. It gets more narrow the older we get, in the sense that it becomes clearer, or more refined, maybe is the right word.
It's actually easier to let go the older you get.
Yeah, that's it. It's easier to let go. And I feel like there are things I let go in the last 6 months that I don't know why I thought I had to hang on to them. I didn't need to.
I heard a metaphor from a friend years ago, and his the metaphor was, if you're going to go on a backpacking trip, you tend to take too much on the first day, and you're discarding things because what you want to get to is to be as light as possible, so you can climb to the peak, and you realize there's another peak that you have to climb, but you have to go down, and you got to get rid of stuff in order to keep going. And that's been an explanation. That's explained a lot of what I've experienced. 10 years ago at this point, I was at let's see, it was 10 years ago this week, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I had gone through 3 losses. My consulting practice had folded. I've been fired from a nonprofit job, directorship that I was running, and my marriage had ended. And all those 3 things were ended, and they were ending in a very clear way. And those were going to stay in the room that I was leaving.
Mm.
And I'm sitting in my apartment, and I realized if I'm going to do anything with the rest of my life, I have to move.
Mm.
And I moved to Wyoming, moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I started over. And I moved out there without a plan. I didn't know what I was going to do.
Wow.
It was very easy to do it. I figured I'd find some way that I could be in Yellowstone every week of the year, but that didn't ever work out. But what it opened up was a total availability to go in whatever direction was presented to me, and that was to start writing. And so I spent 3 years writing a book, and then another year promoting it. And this is how I've experienced what you're talking about. And I spent a year doing book events, traveling all over the country doing book events. And it was in August of 2019. I wake up in the middle of the night after having come home from the next to the last book event, and I wake up in the middle of the night realizing that this chapter of my life is over.
Mm.
And that chapter, this leadership chapter, had begun in the winter of 1984. So a lot of years,
Yeah.
35 years had gone on. And so I'm lying there in bed and I'm saying, so what am I going to do? Okay, God, what do you want me to do? I'm back to my 17-year-old self saying, okay, I'm going to trust that you're going to put something in front of me that I don't know will be the thing when it shows up.
Yeah.
And the other thing is you're going to have to help me financially because I'm really going to spend every last dime pursuing what you want to do. And at that point in time, I was in deep debt.
Mm.
And that was August, July the following year. It became apparent this was the middle of COVID, and it was apparent that I needed to sell my home because the prices of homes were going through the roof, and I could sell my condo. And I sold my condo at such a premium that I was able to pay off all my debt.
Mm.
I was free. And the freedom didn't show up in terms of what I was supposed to do until about a year and a half later when I started writing on Substack. But it wasn't even then when it showed up. It was when I started doing this, the podcast. And what emerged from that was all those years, going back to high school until February of last year, was all preparation for what I'm doing now. And so now what I'm doing now is the best work I've ever done. And that's really, it's strange, in many ways, but I welcome it because what it has done is fulfilled all those things all those junctures over the course of my life where I felt like I really like doing this, but I'm not really good at it. What am I supposed to do? Why am I doing this? And why am I having conflicts here? Why am I having problems here? Why can't I succeed? Why can't I fulfill my promise or whatever it may be? And and all it meant was I just have to keep at it. I trust God, and He's going to lead me into and the trusting of God to lead me into whatever it was whatever is placed before me, I'm going to do that. I'm going to say yes to what is placed before me as long as it's very clear.
Yeah,
And
and that's where I am. I am trying to say yes to everything that's placed before me to see
and
what God.
and the beautiful thing about that is that it opens up all the potential that we have as human beings. And it allows us to be liberated from fear. It allows us to be liberated from the feeling that we need to be compliant with the people who tell us what they think we should do with our lives. It frees us to really be creative, to and um, and what it does, then it brings us into relationship with people that we would never been able to meet otherwise. And my circle of relationships today did not exist 2 years ago. Most of the people I spend my time with today I did not know 2 years ago. But now, they have brought something to me, and I don't know whether any of them have faith or whatever faith they have, but they brought something to me, a validation, which is confirmation that I take as God speaking. And
Yeah, and I think that is the joy of getting older, I have decided. And I'm not, probably sounds weird to say. I know I'm not that old, but I feel like as I've gotten older, the joy that I have experienced is in letting go of the control and the plans that I had, which is not easy but once you start doing it, it gets easier and easier, right? Because you see, as you've said, the relationships that you've formed that are now so life-giving to you. And that's kind of how I'm feeling right now. And for me, that was March when I made that decision. May was when my job ended. It hasn't actually been that long. And in that short amount of time, the choices that I made this summer and the choices that I've made in the last few months have completely altered the landscape of my life in many ways. My faith has grown, my relationships have grown. I mean, just right after you and I are done here, I'm going to go meet this girl that I had no contact with. Somebody just told me you should meet this person. She and I are going to get together today. And it was such a moment where I ran into this woman at a coffee shop and we just started chatting. And she said, "You have to meet this other girl." And then bam. I mean, I don't know what the Lord's going to do there. I am excited to see the ways in which God is going to use the relationships of a person, but also, as you've said, to grow the skill set or to grow the relationships, the community that you have so you can do the thing that you're supposed to do, right? And I I think so, for example, going back to what I said about Sunday and feeling like I've wasted the last 10 years of my life. This morning I had coffee with a mentor of mine, a dear friend. He was a person I worked with at my last place of employment, and we worked together for many years and did a lot of theater together. And he's much older than I am, much wiser than I am. And I always find if I don't listen to him, I regret it. And this morning I said to him, he had a period of his life that was complex. And I said, "Did you ever feel like you'd wasted your life?" And he said, "No, Erin, I was too busy thinking about how to make ends meet and take care of my family." And he said, "You need to stop thinking like that. You need to just think about day to day." And I was like, I know. That's what I need to do. And he said, "Also, you need to just get some sleep."
But on the other hand,
The show's over. It's hard.
because you think that way, that's a gift. And to find the giftedness in the way you're naturally oriented towards thinking and responding. There is something good in that. And so that's why I think we have to be careful of following other people's advice because the beauty of how we go through life is that we learn what works. And if we find ourselves in trouble, and we all find ourselves in trouble at some point, if we're willing to approach it from a faith perspective, meaning what am I supposed to learn from this? And some people say, well, it's what does God teach me, or what is the universe teaching me, or whatever that may be to the person. If we take that attitude, then we have really opened ourselves up to what is possible for us that we would not have been able to see if we simply followed the kind of the rules.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you're saying is instructive because I've already told you the story where the Lord reminded me I listen to other people way too often and I need to listen to him and me, and I think.
So don't listen to me. Don't listen.
Well, I mean, I think like on Sunday, what the Lord reminded me was waiting is good and waiting is active. And you haven't wasted your life. And what my friend said to me this morning is, "Erin, all the people that the Lord used you in their life, like that isn't wasted." And he's right about that. And the friendships and the relationships that I formed, all of that isn't wasted. And the way that I've grown as a person isn't wasted. And the skills that I've formed, none of those things are wasted either. Um, and like you've said, all those things get us ready for what God is going to do in our lives and what he wants for us. I think the hardest question I get now, and I get it a lot, "What do you really want to do with your life, Erin?" And my reply is always, "I don't know.
I'm
I don't know
doing
what
it.
I'm doing it. I think I'm doing it." I told somebody the other day, I said, "I just want to be a stay-at-home person who does what I want." That's a terrible way to make money, but that's what I'd like to do. But I also love to be in a classroom and I'm happy to be able to do it right now in the most simple way possible. For years I taught like theories of the theater, really high level sort of stuff. And now I'm teaching the most basic theater class. And you know what? It's a pleasure because it's so simple and it doesn't require that much of me. So I get to do a lot of other things, which is really exciting to me. I love that.
Well, this is our conversation is not what I thought it was going to be. I thought we were going to talk about art and theater and
We can
things.
talk about all that too.
Well, we'll do that another time.
I have a library to tell you. I can talk about all that, right?
I would like to have a deep conversation with you about aesthetics.
I would love to. Yeah.
All of that stuff is stuff that's one of the things I've done over the last dozen years is the deep dive into all that French theory, because I think it's very important to understand it for the world.
Yeah, and I would say that, I mean, maybe to disappoint you a little bit, that's not the stuff I was ever interested in. So I don't know that I can talk. I mean, I read that stuff, but to say that I know it really well is so, I
Well, I
don't.
don't know it well either. I only know it at the level that I have been able to learn it. Uh,
Yeah.
So I've not had a class or anything like that. So,
Yeah, I would say most of my aesthetic experience has been the aesthetics of theater. So, and modernism and how all of that. My dissertation is on the aesthetics of place in the American play cycle. So, I love to think about how emplacement is occurring, the body, the land, all of that, how you see all of that in the theater. The theater is a placemaker. And
oh yeah, we got a lot more to talk about.
that's the book I want to write. That's the book I've started that I have abandoned in the last few weeks.
Yeah, we definitely need to talk about it. Okay, we're going to reschedule for a more less. Well, I'm not going to say less spiritual, um, but
Sounds
a more intellectual conversation. Erin, thank you for being here. This has been thoroughly exciting to me, and I've enjoyed it very much. I hope it has been for you.
Yeah, it's been encouraging. I needed to hear your story. That was really good.
Thank you, and I hope everyone that is watching. I hope you find encouragement here that not that you have to be something like either one of us, but you can explore and you can try things and you can stop doing things and start new things. And that change and risk and discovery are not hard, difficult, fearful things, but actually the stuff of life. So
Awaken newness, and newness is good. It's good.
it
Yeah.
is. Okay, we'll see you all next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.